All right, well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're at in the world, and welcome back to another Altero Software sponsored webinar, this one on what's new in Windows Server 2022. So my name is Andy Serwich. I'm a technical evangelist with Altero Software and Hornet Security, and with me I got a good friend of mine, Paul Schneckenberg. How's it going, Paul?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Andy?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, it is what, 11 p.m. at night where you're at over there in Australia?
No, it's 10 p.m. It's 10 p.m.
10
So it's not
p.m.
too bad.
I was close. I was close. Anyway, we
Yeah.
appreciate you joining us for the session today. We got a lot of great content to get through, and we have a lot of content to get through. So I think what we should do is we'll just kind of dive right in and just talk about our agenda for the day first before we get too much further. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to do some introductions, and then we're going to get to the what's new stuff, right? We're going to talk about new features. We're going to talk about security enhancements, networking improvements, addition changes in licensing. What's the story with Hyper-V server? If you keep track of the news regarding Hyper-V and just the general Microsoft community, you may or may not have seen some angsty community posts, I guess I would say, over Hyper-V server. So we're going to be talking all about that. We're going to talk about where Azure Stack HCI fits in, and I've also got a demo on Azure Stack HCI management and some other things centered around that. And then, really kind of the section that I'm really looking forward to is just kind of a discussion with Paul and you guys, the attendees. What does it all mean? Where are we all going with this information? So that's going to be a great section. Looking forward to that. And then finally, we'll do some wrap up and Q&A at the end of the session. Now, quick note on the Q&A. Feel free to use the questions form in GoToWebinar as we step through the content. You can put a question in anytime you want. If we can kind of organically stop and address any question as we go along, we'll certainly do so. Otherwise, we'll try and get to as many of the questions during the Q&A at the end as we can. Quite frequently, we don't get to them all because of time constraints. So usually what we do is we do some sort of follow-up blog post, or what we've been doing lately is doing a follow-up video where we cover all the questions that we didn't get to. So keep an eye out for that. If you ask a question today that didn't get answered, we will make sure you get an answer at some point in the coming week or two. So with that, let's get to our introductions. So first off, my name is Andy Serwich. I think we've got there we go. There's my smiling face. So again, my name is Andy Serwich. I'm a technical evangelist with Hornet Security and Altero Software. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency. I was originally a MVP in the Hyper-V competency before they combined competency areas. So the Hyper-V news is especially interesting to me because of that. If you're interested in connecting with me on Twitter, my handle is @aserwich. Apologies, you'll have to spell the last name. I keep meaning to change that at some point, but well, not enough hours in the day, I guess. So, and Paul, I'll hand it over to you to do your own introductions, my friend.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Schneckenberg. I'm originally from Sweden, but I've been in Australia for just over 20 years. I run my own business down here. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm an editor for the one of the dojos, soon to be two of the dojos on Altaro's site. I'm at Paul Schnack. I'm not a frequent Twitterer, but or tweeter person, but you can reach out to me there if you want to. Back to you, Andy.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul. And then just a quick word about the sponsor of today's webinar, Hornet Security. So we are the most comprehensive cloud security service for Microsoft 365 in the market. So we do spam filtration, advanced email security, continuity archiving, compliance requirements, backup and recovery. We also do all of that same stuff for on-premise mail servers as well. So if you're running Microsoft Exchange on-prem, or maybe you're using Google Apps, or maybe some sort of weird on-prem open source mail server, they still are out there in the wild. We provide services for those as well. On top of that, we can host mailboxes with full security. We do web security as well, and backup and recovery, which I'll show you a little bit of that when we get to the Azure Stack HCI section near the end of the session today. Now with that, I think we've got a poll next, don't we, Paul?
That might be true. There we are. No,
you're talking that's right. I've got two more Hornet Security slides. So just to give you an idea of the reach of the organization. So we are a global company. We've got 9 data centers, and I think this slide is a little dated. I need to update this. I think it's 19 offices around the globe now. So we are a fairly large organization. We do have boots on the ground in many countries worldwide. And the next slide, we actually talk about, kind of where the company got its start. So really, the company started back in the 2008-ish time frame. Can we advance that slide, Paul?
Sure.
Yeah, appreciate it. And so yeah, the company got started back in that 2008 time frame. Really started with archiving and email encryption, and then as we got more into modern day, started working on things more focused to the M365 stack. And then Hornet Security really started making a lot of strategic acquisitions, like the acquisition of Altera Software, to really round out that product portfolio. That way we worry about the security so that you can worry about what it is you do, right? So really excited to be part of this organization. A lot of great features, and we hope you'll check those out when you get a chance. So with that, now I think we're onto the poll, right? I'm gonna laugh if I'm wrong again.
You're wrong.
All right, I know you put this one in here, Paul. Did you want to cover this really quick?
Oh yeah, so we got a few cartoons in here by a guy called Forrest Brazil. He does these cartoons that are IT related, and I just thought you've probably seen this one or a variant of it, but it's just it's kind of different depending on which industry you're in, and I certainly can remember turning the servers off to see whether anybody protests. So probably don't want to do that if you're in a hospital. Right, Paul.
The good old scream test. Yep, we've all been there. So yeah, I think we've got a poll next, right after the new features slide.
Yeah. So
I can launch the poll. There we go. Okay. So yeah, everyone, we've got a quick. Yep, I see it. Yep, we've got it up here. So just a quick poll. We always like to kind of poll the audience just to see where you guys are at. Really what we wanted to see is what you're most excited about with the release of Windows Server 2022. I will say what's interesting about this particular release is it didn't receive a lot of fanfare from the Microsoft side of the world. So some folks aren't even aware that it came out yet. But for those that are aware, what features or what are you most excited about? And we've got multiple options here. Storage, that includes S2D, Azure Stack HCI, Hyper-V, Active Directory, and other roles and features. And if I had to guess here, Paul, I would guess people are probably most excited about Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, that's not what the poll is saying, though. It's interesting.
It's really
just over 50% have just voted, and there currently Hyper-V is in the lead.
And there is one trick question on this poll as well.
Okay.
I know which one it is. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that poll out and let's display the results. And I'm gonna go ahead and share those results here. And you're right, Azure Stack HCI at 20%. I'd be curious to see those in the chat. Is that because you feel it's very Azure centric and that's why the low interest, or maybe it's just so new that you guys don't want to start using it yet? So if you want to just drop a response to that in the questions form, if you have any feedback, I'd be interested to know. But like you said, Hyper-V is the big one here with 65%, Active Directory at 54%. And when I say there's a little bit of a trick question, there's not a whole lot new that's in Active Directory, right, Paul?
Nope.
Yep.
Nope.
Yep. There's not a whole lot that's new in Active Directory. So that was kind of a little bit of a mean trick on my part. But I was kind of curious to see, whether people are expecting there to be new features in AD or not. So that kind of confirms my suspicions that there's a large portion of the audience that does, that's expecting new features in AD, right? So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well, appreciate the feedback, everyone, and we'll kind of scoot on to the next section of our presentation. So I just closed the slide, and I think we're on to you, right, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. So everybody's seen my pretty face now, so I'm going to kill my camera. And
yeah, just so folks know, we were having some bandwidth issues to Australia just before the session, so we want to make sure you can hear what we're saying. So just imagine our smiling faces for the rest of the session, right?
Right, so excellent, and I'm calling out somebody from Perth here in the questions list, and then I'll get back to the questions when I stop talking. So we're going to head straight into new features of Windows Server 2022, and essentially what happened here, and I'm still really funny that this guy is smiling so much when he's staring at a blank screen. I still think that's funny. Anyway, Windows Server 2022 came out in preview, then it came out, and Microsoft ran an event that took 2.5 hours, where they talked about the new features, and less than half of that was actually new features in Windows Server 2022. So they were, talking about other features that are adjacent to Windows Server 2022. So there's not a lot coming here, but there is some things, and we need to be aware of those, obviously, if we are in the Windows Server world. So storage migration services is one of those dark horses. I've used this in production a couple of times. It is a great feature. It's been around for a couple of versions now, and they have improved it. So if you have NetApp servers on premises, or you have Linux servers running Samba, or you have your Windows file server, including clustered file servers, you can migrate from an old file server on an earlier versions of Windows Server to a Windows Server 2022. And you can either run this as a proxy, so if you have multiple servers that you want to migrate from multiple servers to multiple servers, you can have this thing as a proxy in the middle. Now the traffic, the data doesn't actually go through the proxy, it's just the orchestration of the migration. Or you can have a pull server where the new server simply pulls the data from the old one. This is a seamless migration, so the end result is you have a new file server or a cluster of file servers that looks exactly like the old ones. All the data is the same, all the file share permissions are the same, all the ACLs are the same, all the names are the same, so your end users notice no difference, but you are now having a file server on a modern operating system. And you can go back, I think, to 2012 or even 2012 R2, something like that. One of the new features here is it's Azure File Sync Aware. So if you have a file server that is syncing to Azure for backup, disaster recovery, and bottomless storage, essentially, the storage migration service will be aware of this as it is migrating the data, so it's not pulling it too fast, because if you have files that are not actually physically present on the file server, they're going to be pulled down from Azure, and that pipe to the internet is probably a lot slower than the pipe between the two file servers in your data center. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of useful. Scalability has massively increased. There was no jump between Windows Server 16 and 19. So we have a big jump here to Windows Server 2022. So you can have 48 terabytes of memory in a physical server. You can have 2048 cores or logical processors. So if you have multi-threading, that's just over 1,000 cores in a physical machine. That is going to be important to absolutely zero people on this call, because nobody can afford those big machines. But do know that Microsoft only presents figures like this when they have physically tested it. So somewhere on Microsoft's campus, there is a machine with 48,000 gigabytes of memory physically installed in it. This will only be important if you are running really, really big workloads in Azure and you want to have really big virtual machines in Azure, because they will eventually run on Server 2022 and be able to have really, really big virtual machines. The server core container images have been shrunk by about 1 gigabyte. The Nano core for new applications is, or the Nano container image is 100 megabytes. And we have GPU DirectX support in containers. And we have the group managed service accounts. So the way to manage accounts for containers without having to domain join your host. That is another new feature that we've got. So that could be useful if you're running containers on your Windows server. And we have already covered that. We have another cartoon here. And I suspect that most people on this call can relate to this one. So that's why we drive people away. If we have the old, you know, very strict approach to how we manage IT in a company, you end up with shadow IT. So, so there you go. We have a bunch of security enhancements. So, secure core server. This is probably the big one. This is the big ticket item that Microsoft has made a big noise about. I've written a couple of articles on this. And essentially, if you've heard of secure core PCs that came out, I don't know, a year and a half ago, something like that, the first ones from Microsoft, the core idea here being that you get a physical machine, a new device, or in this case a server, that is already protected. It's got all the right security features turned on out of the box. So if you buy a Dell or an HP or a Lenovo server that is a secure core server, these things are all turned on out of the box, and all the firmware drivers are signed and properly set up, and everything else is ready to go. This is a really important feature because UEFI attacks are increasing. We have a bunch of links on the very last slide. We'll post those into the to the chat window towards the end of the session. And one of those links is one that I put in literally 10 minutes before we started this presentation, which talks about UEFI malware that has been found in the wild. So far so good. However, we're going to come back to why secure core server, although a very interesting technology and does make you more secure, is perhaps not such a big deal as they try to make it out. So SMB gets a lot of attention in Windows Server. So the new one in Windows 11 and Windows Server is Server 2022 is SMB 3.11. So not because AES 128 is insecure, but if you need it for compliance reason, you can now use AES 256-bit encryption for your SMB traffic. You can encrypt your RDMA traffic, so your SMB direct over very, very fast NICs can be encrypted. Unlike Server 19 and earlier, you have more granular control over the encryption between nodes in a cluster. So you can choose to encrypt the traffic going from the servers to your clients accessing it, and or you can control the encryption between the nodes in the cluster. You also have signing, which used to be not very performant. That is now super fast. And then we have SMB over QUIC, and I was looking at the questions earlier on, and somebody did point out that they wanted to know more about this. So it's called SMB over QUIC. So QUIC is an internet standard, and Microsoft has a version of it that they've implemented and made open source in Windows Server, which is called SMB or MS QUIC. And basically what this means is you can have a file server being accessed over the internet from domain joined machines, Windows 11 only, and with a third-party app from Android devices, totally securely without having to implement a VPN. This is a fantastic idea. It's really cool, but first of all, it's only in preview at the moment. Even though Server 2022 is out, it's still in preview. The second thing is, it is only available in a specific version of Windows Server 2022, and we'll come to that in a minute. Now, transport layer security, what we used to call SSL, which is now TLS, which is enabled by default in Windows Server 2022. It is a more secure way of doing TLS. It is the latest standard. It only supports 5 cipher suites, and those all support perfect forward security, which means that even if you store encrypted traffic, you capture it and store it and hope that in 2 years' time there will be some attack against TLS 1.3 that will enable you to decrypt it, you won't be able to, right? So that's a good feature. The other feature we've got is DNS over HTTPS, or DOE. So this is where your DNS traffic is encrypted so that it is harder to track what you're doing on the network. These are all good features, but you'll notice there's another set of asterisks there. So the first one is, if you're going to do SMB over QUIC, you can only do it with Windows 11 clients connecting to, well, I suppose you could have a Server 2022 connecting to a Server 2022 Azure Edition. So we'll come to editions in a little bit, but it needs to be this version of Windows Server. So your standard, so Windows Server 2022 Standard and Windows 2022 Server Data Center do not support SMB over QUIC. It has to be Azure Edition. And we'll talk about where you can run Azure Edition. And then we have that third-party Android client. Now, when it comes to DNS over HTTPS, that is only where Windows 11 and Server 2022 is a client talking to another third-party DNS server that supports HTTPS or DNS over HTTPS. The DNS server in Server 2022 does not support DNS over HTTPS.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, real quick, I want to jump in with the questions regarding SMB over QUIC. So yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the edition section here in a second. But if you're more interested in specifically how the feature works, the previous webinar we did with Didier Van Hoy, we covered basically all the advanced storage stuff in Windows Server, and Didier actually did a demo of SMB over QUIC. So that webinar is available on demand on our webinar section of our website. That said, I will make sure that we get that put in as a resource in the follow-up blog post in case you're interested in seeing that demo. So just an FYI.
Great, Andy. I totally agree. Seeing a demo, I mean, it is a really, really cool technology, and I can totally see users with some of my clients. I mean, it's a really cool technology, but it is gated behind that Azure Edition thing. So that's a little bit of a challenge. We've got some networking improvements. So a TCP high start and recent acknowledgement rack. Now we're really digging deep. If you want to learn more about these, we have links to the papers that talk about these. Basically, this is about both TCP and in some cases UDP being run over very, very fast networks. So, 10 gigabits, 40 gigabits, even 100 gigabits is starting to become commonplace. And on those sorts of networks, when traffic starts flowing, you want it to really ramp up quickly. And that's what these two technologies do. USO, UDP segmentation offload, is similar to how if you buy a network card today, it'll generally do TCP offloads. So it'll take a lot of the crunching of TCP packets as they come in and out of your network card and manage that with silicon directly on the network card to speed up the processing. This will do the same for UDP, not just for TCP. Azure Extended Network is a really interesting feature. This builds on VXLAN, which is originally a VMware technology for software-defined networking in Hyper-V. And basically what this technology means is that if you have machines on premises that needs to have specific IP addresses and you cannot re-IP them and migrate them to Azure, you can connect your on-premises network via a Windows Server 2022 server to Azure and keep your IP addresses as you move machines over there. Okay, SMB compression is another good, very useful feature. Generally, if we look at servers today and the statistics for these servers, we have plenty of CPU capacity spare. So by compressing SMB traffic, we gain bandwidth gains depending on what traffic you're sending over the wire. Of course, it depends on what if you got 200 gigabytes of JPEG files, you're probably not going to see a great improvement. But depending on what you're transporting, you can see really good results here. Now you can set this at the server level, you can set this at the share level, you can set it on the client level, and you can even, if you're using things like Robocopy, you can actually use a switch to say that you want to compress the traffic as it's going. I had a little bit of a chuckle at that one, but there we go. I can't hear you laughing, which is a little bit sad.
I enjoyed that one myself. The Git push. I'm gonna start. My kid's a little bit too old for me to be pushing him on the swing anymore. But if I had one that age, I'd start doing that.
Yeah. Now you're making me feel really old. Mine is 31, so I'm not going to be pushing her on any swings for a while, I think. Anyway, we move over to edition changes and licensing, because I can see a few questions in the thing floating past here. So we have Windows Server 2022 standard, as we've had in the past. There is an essentials, which is limited to 25 users, 50 devices, and 1 CPU that can have a maximum of 10 cores. However, this is just a pricing thing. It is still exactly the same as Windows Server 2022 standard. Now, if you haven't worked in the SMB space, what I'm about to say doesn't affect you at all. But there used to be a real essential server that had SMB features in it. They were all taken out of Windows Server 2019, so certainly not around in 2022. Then we have the Windows Server 2022 Data Center, which gives you storage replica. There's like a light version in standard, but so storage replica is it's not a new feature. We've had it in 19 and 16, but it gives you replication on the disk level between two servers, and that replication can be over a wide area network. So it's essentially SAN replication built into Windows Server, so you don't have to buy an expensive SAN and then buy the expensive license to have SAN to SAN replication. You can do it all in Windows Server. And then Storage Spaces Direct, which is sharing disks in a cluster to make them appear as a single storage space, is also available only in Data Center. Now, here's that Server 22 Data Center Azure Edition. Now, it adds some interesting features. We've already mentioned SMB over Quick. It also does hot patching. So this is a feature that we've had available in Azure for a while. Essentially what this means is that you can install a patch for the operating system, which gets recycled in memory without actually rebooting the machine. Not every patch can be applied this way, but a lot of them can, which gives you excellent uptime. However, it's only available on Server Core. If you're running server with a GUI or desktop edition, so you can actually have Windows icons and things, you don't get hot patching. And the last bit, and this one is going to have yearly feature updates, so this is probably where Microsoft is going to spend their time. Now you can then say, well, hang on a second, where can I run this? Because it sounds like you can only run it in Azure, and of course you can run it in Azure, right, as a VM in IaaS in Azure, no problem. You can also run this on Azure Stack HCI, which is where Andy's going to talk more about this. So as I mentioned, there is no real essentials anymore. This is just a pricing feature that it's a little bit cheaper, but you're still only getting Server 2022 standard and no real essentials feature. And Hyper-V Server, Andy's going to talk more about that in a minute, but there is no Hyper-V Server 2022. The last version of that is Hyper-V Server 2019. Now, I want to point out here that Server 2012 and 2012 R2 have the same support expiry on the 10th of October 2023. So we're just shy of 2 years, which goes past very fast in IT. If you migrate those servers into Azure, you got VMs on premises and you want to migrate, or physical servers, and you want to migrate them into Azure, you can get, just like we can today with 2008 and 2008 R2, you can get extended support and extended patches for those for up to 3 years in Azure for no extra cost. And I'm going to hand over to you, Andy.
Sounds good. You know, I'm seeing a trend here. There's a lot of carrots being given out for moving things to the cloud. I'm just an observation, you know. So, all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and steal presenter view, make myself the presenter, and I'm going to show PowerPoint and show this window. You should see the slide deck, Paul. I'm hoping so.
I am not. I'm waiting to view Andy's screen.
Oh, hold on.
And I think we're in business. I got a gray line. No, it
Yeah, hold
disappeared.
on. I had a technical difficulty. Here we go. It's
And
showing. Do you see the whole screen
now
or?
I see the whole screen. I see a
Oh,
green
hold
bar
on.
over here. That's
How
better.
about now?
That is much better. Well done.
All right, there we go. You guys probably don't want to see the entire ultra wide. That probably isn't useful. Anyway, so what's up with Hyper-V Server? This is what we're going to talk about next. And yeah, so first off, what I want to talk about as part of this particular bullet point, this doesn't mean that Hyper-V is going away. I've seen post after post. I've even seen some news stories from reputable IT news sites that you read the headline and it's like, oh my God, Hyper-V is going away. That's not the case. What we're talking about here is we're talking about the free SKU of Windows Server that just contains what you need to run virtualized workloads. That free SKU has been around for, boy, I think since 2012, I think, right, Paul? Right, Paul, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Now my memory's not that great, but anyway, so yeah, that's what's going away here. And there's been a lot of mixed reaction in the community over this particular decision. And so kind of where we saw some confirmation of this, I've actually linked to a Microsoft communities thread where Eldon Christensen from the Windows Server team was actually very involved in that thread. And where he says here is that, hey, Azure Stack HCI, which I'm going to be talking about in a second, is really the strategic direction for their hypervisor platform. And with that, you look a little bit further down in this post, you can see that, hey, Microsoft Hyper-V Server 2019, again, the free SKU, is that product's last version. So that's kind of what the news is here. So when I think about use cases for Hyper-V Server, the big one that I'm aware of are, hosters or anyone that's hosting up open source workloads. So maybe you want to host up a bunch of Linux virtual machines using Hyper-V. This was a great solution for that because there was no licensing cost for the hypervisor itself, right? So this is kind of like the Microsoft equivalent of VMware's free ESXi hypervisor, right? Kind of the same thing. So this is actually going away. And again, as you can see here, the new strategic direction is Azure Stack HCI. Now, moving forward a little bit more, why is it going away, right? That's the question that I keep seeing again and again in thread after thread and comment section after comment section is why is it going away? And I best I can do here is kind of use my crystal ball, right? I don't know the definitive answer, but I will say that I've been in the Microsoft MVP program for going on 9 years now, and what I've learned in that time is that Microsoft doesn't make these decisions for no reason at all. What I suspect is going on here, and I kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago when I took over the screen share from Paul, is that kind of seeing a trend here with a lot of these features, along with some of the major features being gated behind Windows Server Azure Edition. We're now starting to see more of a concentrated effort, in my opinion, by Microsoft to say, hey, we want you to be using Azure, or at least be using hybrid cloud services, right? There's just this real push to hybrid cloud. Microsoft, all of their innovation, all of their development is being heavily focused into cloud and hybrid cloud technologies. Again, we see evidence of that from the fact that you look at core services on Windows servers like AD, DNS. I even got a question a couple of weeks ago, what's new in certificate services? There's nothing new in certificate services, right? So you kind of read between the lines, you really see that that's kind of the reason for it. And you pair that also with the fact that the most popular type of workload for virtual machines on top of Microsoft Azure are open source workloads. Again, you kind of see the removal of Hyper-V Server as kind of a little bit more of a forceful nudge to stop using that on-premises platform in favor of something that is at least hybrid cloud focused like Azure Stack HCI. Now, that all said, Hyper-V Server isn't going away anytime soon. You saw on that previous slide where Hyper-V Server 2019 is going to be the final version of that product. It still follows the support lifecycle of Windows Server 2019. So even though it's a free SKU, you can still pay to have a support incident done on it. It's still going to get patches up until January 9th of 2029. So you've got 7-8 years to plan that transition, and the new way forward is Azure Stack HCI, and I'm sure there'll be other options by the time we finally get around to that January 9th, 2029 date. So again, it's not going away anytime soon. Again, this doesn't mean Hyper-V itself is going away. We're going to be talking about a little bit more how important Hyper-V is to Microsoft as a technology a little bit later in this presentation. So what are your alternatives, right? So using this information, what are your alternatives? Well, you can stay on Hyper-V Server 2019, for another 7 or 8 years, right? So that certainly is an option. We talked about Azure Stack HCI, which I'm going to get a little bit more into here in a second. The free VMware ESXi is also a option if you're still looking for a free hypervisor. Hyper-V is near and dear to my heart, so that certainly is my preference, but I'm also a VMware vExpert, and the ESXi virtualization vCloud vSphere is a highly performant, very mature virtualization solution, so that certainly works as well. And then finally, the use case I gave earlier about a lot of these organizations that are using Hyper-V Server historically do it for open source workloads. The KVM/QEMU hypervisor inside of the Linux kernel it's matured very nicely these last couple of years. So if you've got the expertise in-house to run all these Linux VMs, you probably have the expertise to use KVM and QEMU as well. So certainly look at that as an alternative. So with that, let's talk about Azure Stack HCI. Excuse me. So where does it fit into the entire ecosystem? And this particular image, I meant to put the link here. I'll be sure that gets put in the follow-up blog post. But basically, what this image here is from docs.microsoft.com, and it kind of shows you where Azure Stack HCI fits into the entire cloud and hybrid cloud ecosystem. And I remember when I first heard the name Azure Stack HCI and learning what it was, I'm like, oh, there's no way that's not going to confuse people or anything, right? You can sense the sarcasm in my voice. So despite the name, Azure Stack HCI actually lives on premises. So starting on the left-hand side of this particular screen, we've got Microsoft Azure, which is the public cloud that Microsoft builds, supports, and maintains, where you can run compute, storage, networking. You've got all of the various IaaS, PaaS services that are involved in that platform. SQL in Azure is the big one that comes to mind when I think about that, and all of the other bells and whistles that are associated with the public Azure platform, right? Then you've got Azure Stack in the middle, which basically brings the power of public Azure cloud to your data center in a all built, purposed, basically an appliance type of model that it actually bring this half stack or full stack into your data center, plug it up, and you have Azure built into your data center. And then on the right hand side, we've got Azure Stack HCI, which is historically what you've been doing with your Hyper-V clusters on premises up until today. So all Azure Stack HCI is it's Hyper-V, it's storage spaces direct, it's software-defined networking, it's all of those technologies that we've been using all along in Windows Server, but it's been packaged up into a nice, easy to use, easy to install process using either hyper-converged systems that are fully vetted and certified by third-party vendors like HP, Dell, Lenovo, or you can utilize the Azure Stack HCI catalog, which again, I'll be sure we get the links to that put in the follow-up blog post as well. You can go into this catalog and you can pick out certified hardware and craft your own solution as well. Now that said, Azure Stack HCI, it's really used for the on-prem virtualized apps. A couple other key things here. As Paul mentioned, you can actually use Azure Stack HCI to run Azure Edition, so that 2022 version, the Azure edition of Windows Server 2022, to get some of those gated features we talked about. And then here's the sticking point and where a lot of the angst is coming from. So we're moving from what has historically been a free SKU, right? And they're now asking people to move towards Azure Stack HCI, and this is how it's priced. You're priced at $10 per physical core per month. Now, for small organizations, that doesn't seem a lot, but it is more than free, right? Is part of the issue. And out of curiosity, I've roughly known how much Windows Server Data Center has costed over the last decade on and off through all of the iterations and changes. As an exercise, I said, okay, what if I have a server that has 8 cores in it, and maybe I have a 3-node cluster. So we're talking 24 CPU cores. So that's $240 a month times 3, basically times 36 months, comes out to, if I remember correctly, about $8,000, which now the math is making sense. It's really starting to feel like a data center license purchase at that point. But we are covering 3 nodes. So again, value is subjective, right? But my whole point here is that's basically how Azure Stack HCI is priced today and moving forward. So with that, what I want to do is I just want to spend a little time kind of going through the management process of Azure Stack HCI, right? And let me move over to RDP. Paul, you should be able to see Windows Admin Center, correct?
I can indeed.
Perfect. All right, so what I've got here, just so you can see, I actually have one giant, I don't remember what series virtual machine living in Azure, but you can see I have one giant virtual machine running in Azure that has nested virtualization enabled, and I'm running a bunch of virtualized Azure Stack HCI nodes here, each with 32 gigs of memory. I've got a domain controller running in this environment, a management VM, and this 2019 VM is used for something else, so we'll ignore that for now. So you can pretend that this is a physical deployment, but this deployment actually lives on a single VM in Azure. So this entire solution, it's a separate ISO you download, you install it, you run through this this installation wizard. It helps you get all of the software-defined networking, all the storage configured. Basically, it really does a good job of walking you through the process. It also walks you through patching the servers before you actually try to establish the cluster. I think back to how we've been establishing clusters all of these years, and they've really done a good job of wizardifying it, I guess I would say, taking all of that complexity and getting it down into a couple of screens inside of a wizard. Now, the entire solution is managed using Windows Admin Center, which I've got here. And this is just the dashboard view. So dashboard view, hey, what's the overall highlights of my particular cluster? I've only got 3 virtual machines running on this 3-node cluster. So obviously it's not doing a ton. So you can see CPU usage, memory usage across the entire cluster, storage usage. If you've used Windows Admin Center, this is all very familiar to what you've seen before. Now, if I kind of start stepping through what the cluster looks like, we come down here to servers and inventory. You can see all of my various Azure Stack HCI nodes here. If it was a physical machine, you'd see the model and the serial number, but these are all VMs, again, living in Azure, like I said. And we can drill into these and we can manage these nodes individually if we want. We've got all the typical roles that you're features and roles that you're used to seeing inside of a failover cluster. So I can drain the roles. I can manage that node specifically if I want. So if I want to do any management task on that node specifically, I can drill down into it and I can see all the various bits and pieces of this particular node in the cluster. And then if I head back to the cluster itself, you'll see a couple of other things are involved here as well. So Azure Kubernetes Service, this is kind of one of the big areas where we're seeing a lot of development. So once you have an Azure Stack HCI cluster up and running, you can actually install AKS on top of your on-prem solution. So historically, this solution has only lived in Microsoft Azure, but you can install it now on top of Azure Stack HCI if you want. And the other thing I like about using Windows Admin Center for this is if you haven't configured a particular feature or function yet, they've got all the relevant links right here in the UI out to the docs articles that you need to start planning that implementation. Now, just a couple of other things to show here. Again, Azure Stack HCI utilizes storage spaces direct under the hood. So if I go here and I actually look, I've got 18 drives that are associated with these 3 nodes. They're all healthy currently. And if I drill into the actual inventory of disks, serial number is all unknown because they're all virtual disks, right? But basically I've got 18 100 gigabyte disks that live in this storage spaces direct cluster. And you can see how the utilization is used across them. And if I drill into volumes, I can see like, okay, how have these disks been carved up and how are they being presented to the cluster? So you can see here, I've got 3 different volumes. The cluster performance volume gets created automatically at the time of cluster creation. And I've gone off and I've carved off a volume specifically for ISOs. Old, standalone hypervisor habit of mine, I guess. And then VM storage, which is where the virtual machines in the cluster live. Now, 2 other sections I want to cover really quick before we move on. So virtual switches, like I mentioned, the wizard does a really good job of kind of walking you through the setup process of all that historically complex stuff like the software-defined networking. So as part of the wizard, it set up this converged switch for me based on the networking cards that are the NICs that were detected during installation. So if I drill into this, I can see, hey, I've got 1 NIC that I'm using for management, and I've got these 2 other NICs, 10 gig speed, that are paired in a converged switch method. So again, it does all this for you with a couple of basic decisions during the setup process, which is pretty nice. And then the other thing I really like about this management solution is cluster aware updating is baked right into Windows Admin Center. So basically what this will do is it'll go out and see, okay, what updates are available for the nodes in this cluster, and it will actually use cluster aware updating to update the entire cluster for you, drain the roles as it patches each node, and keep everything up and running while it patches all the nodes underneath, which kind of is really a nice feature that you don't have to worry about, draining VMs yourself, manually running patches. It kind of automates the whole process for you, which is nice. And then finally, if you drill into the settings section here, you can see that, hey, we've got a lot of the typical failover clustering settings that we've been dealing with all of these years, right? How the load balancing works, how the cluster witness is set up, enhanced session mode settings, things like that. And also you'll see this Azure Stack HCI registration. So if I go back out to the dashboard, I can actually register this Azure Stack HCI. You're actually required to, for licensing purposes, register it with Azure. And if I drill into view the resource inside of Azure, I can come in here and I can actually see the basic resources as they exist. So here I can say I've got this Azure Stack HCI cluster, and these are the nodes that are associated with it. If I went and actually set up Azure Arc, that's probably another big buzzword that you guys have heard of lately. If I set up Azure Arc, I could even perform management functions directly from the Azure portal against my Azure Stack HCI implementation. So this kind of all goes to show that hybrid cloud is really a destination for Microsoft. not just part of the journey, as I think a lot of people think it is. They really see it as a destination, and there are some people that genuinely need to remain on premise. This is kind of the best of both worlds, giving you that on-premise option while giving you some of the power and capabilities of the public cloud, right? And then finally, one other thing I wanted to show here, you're going to see an error message or two here because my the licensing in my Altera VM backup lab has, I just noticed that the licensing had expired this morning, but I just wanted to at least show you the host view inside of our backup application here, that we do fully support backing up Azure Stack HCI clusters. You can see I've got the cluster added here in the host view in Altera VM backup, and you just treat them just like they were any other on-premises, Hyper-V host, and we can back up and protect workloads on those clusters. So with that, let me hop back over to the PowerPoint. Should see the PowerPoint again, Paul, right?
Yep, can see it. Perfect. Excellent.
What does it all mean? And that's I really laughed at this one the other day. Paul, you want to walk us through this one? I got a good chuckle out of this, particularly because of the last
talking about changes, right? We're talking about, I can see a few comments of the people in the question area talking about cloud is not really the future, etc., and it's just a money-making machine, etc. The reality is, of course, it is one tool in the tool belt, depending on what your business is, what your regulations are, how agile your business is, etc. Certainly going through some of the changes, right? There will be people who still held on to their mainframe since the 60s, right? There will be people who are going to hold on to the VMware virtual machines till somebody pries it out of their cold dead hands, right? So we go through changes in IT, and I'm not sure that we're all going to hail Alexa goddess of power, but and I'm pretty sure we're not going to end up with Linux on the desktop after we've learned about slide rules, but you know what I mean. It's there.
When I saw Linux on the desktop coming after basically what looks like the Stone Age, like I laughed so hard when I saw that, because
that's a good one.
Ancient history for me, I was a Linux administrator at one point in time, and they've been saying this is the year of the Linux desktop every year since probably 1985, and we're still waiting. So anyway.
We move on to the next slide. We've got a few things to talk about here. So the reality is, as Andy covered very eloquently, there is a push to hybrid and cloud. But notice how Microsoft is not saying you got to be in Azure. They're saying if you want to run on premises, we've got Azure Stack Hub. If you happen to have a lot of money and you get a rack of servers that you can't touch, and then you can run your workloads on there in a totally Azure software-based platform, or you can run Azure Stack HCI. So you can have a managed Kubernetes cluster managed from the cloud for you, updated from the cloud automatically. Fantastic, right? You can be hybrid. You can still, be both on premises and take advantage of the cloud-based new features. The secure core server that we covered in the beginning, you got to remember that is just for physical servers, right? So how many physical servers do you actually have in your data center that you're going to buy new physical servers for and run Server 2022 on them? It's a great thing to protect it. Somebody asked in the questions whether you require TPM 2.0. Yes, you do. Now, the other thing that Microsoft made a big deal out of is TLS 1.3. As far as I could find online, it is already in preview in Windows 10. And I cannot imagine that once it is baked and totally ready, that they will not backport it to Server 16 and Server 19, because those servers are still in production. I don't think it'll come to 12 and 12R2, but certainly those things will be there as well. So whilst it's a great new feature, it is not a reason to upgrade. System Center itself, apart from Configuration Manager, which is now part of Endpoint Manager, is now on life support. A few years ago, it used to be that when a new Windows Server version came out, they had to have the System Center version to match coming out at the same time to aid in adoption. Doesn't seem to be quite as important anymore, because System Center 2022 is not coming out until the first half of next year. Now, as Andy covered, Hyper-V is still a huge investment area for Microsoft. All of Azure, the millions of physical servers in Azure that you can run your IaaS VMs on top of, run Hyper-V. So Microsoft is not going to stop investing in Hyper-V. And Windows Server and Hyper-V containers, which is another thing that they talk a lot about in Windows Server 2022, it's a great feature, but the reality is that market share wise, Windows Server containers and Hyper-V containers are mostly used for migrating existing workloads, older applications that you have into a containerized world. They're not really used heavily for writing new applications. Next slide.
Yep, I think one other piece of interesting Hyper-V trivia, one of my favorite piece of Hyper-V trivia is Xbox actually runs Hyper-V as well. Just kind of a interesting piece of trivia for the day.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So don't try to fight the wave. The wave is coming. This isn't just a Microsoft invention. The cloud is happening. Hybrid is happening. It's been happening for years. I get a bonus point for anybody who puts into the question and answer area who made the quote, be the water or be water. Just move along with it. And we talked about the paradigm shifts, right? It's not going to help your business, your clients, or anyone else, and certainly not your career, to desperately hold on to your to the old technology. And hybrid is here to stay for a long time, and it's going to be the new normal for a very, very long time. You can specialize. Bruce Lee, well done, Stuart. Absolutely. Yeah, oh, there are several people. There must be a little bit of a delay. Oh yeah, we've got several people coming in from Bruce Lee there. Yeah, that absolutely. You can specialize, right? There are people who are making a good career out of being the Exchange server specialist, because there are still people who run that on premises, and they're going to do that for the foreseeable future. But maybe you're not going to be quite as versatile as somebody who learns about the cloud as well. Obviously, continuously learning is really, really important, makes you a more versatile IT professional. And I can't help it, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, so I do have to point out that certification gives you a lot of confidence and gives you a more broader view of a product. In that vein, Microsoft has or will release 2 new certifications based on Windows Server 2022. There weren't any for Server 19, they're now coming in Server 2022, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to mention along those lines, we actually have a new podcast, a Dojo podcast coming here shortly. And one of the episodes I talked with Mike Bender, who is a author evangelist for Pluralsight. We talked specifically about those 2 new certifications. So be on the lookout for that here sometime in the near future.
Cool. Nice plug.
So I think we've got one more poll here. Let me go ahead and launch that. So, knowing all that, we covered a lot of information there, I know. Which of the following will be your core priority moving forward as an IT professional? So kind of interested to see where everyone's going to land on this, like after we've, basically presented kind of what we see as the all the relevant information moving forward. How do you guys think you're going to tackle this? I kind of thought about select, basically giving the option to select all that apply, but we changed this to just select your core priority, just to kind of see where we end up. And we'll use this information obviously to fashion content, come up with new blog topics and that type of stuff in the future for you guys to consume. All right, so it's been open for 45 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and close that and share the results really quick. So hybrid management, that's kind of where I figured people would end up. And they're still at 26% holding out on-prem, which makes sense. That's about right. You got those very compliancy driven organizations that may have a requirement to be on-prem, right? So that's that makes sense. All right, so let me hide those results. We got just a couple other slides here. Here's another good one from Forrest, right? Paul, you have any comments on this one you want to share?
Not really. I mean, it really is the ability to study for a certification exam. Lots of people tell me that they're useless, and I respectfully disagree. They are very useful, I think, for a lot of people in the IT industry.
Yep, agreed. All right, so wrap up in Q&A. If you have not gotten your questions in, be sure to get those into the question form, and we'll probably go a couple of minutes over here just to see if we can address as many of those. We've been trying to get to as many of them as we've been stepping along as we can. So with that in mind, I just want to let you know that I need to update this this slide because Hornet Security Threat Monitor is out. It is not coming soon, but it is out. So basically what this tool does, it's a phone app that's available on the Android App Store and the iOS App Store that allows you to basically test the permeability of Exchange Online Protection. So as you know, any SKU that you get with a mailbox from Microsoft 365 has Exchange Online Protection, which has a 99.9% detection rate, or sorry, 99% detection rate, whereas our products have a 99.9% detection rate. So if you're interested in checking that out, go ahead and check out the URL there at the bottom. You will be getting a copy of the slide deck, so don't feel like you have to quick write down the URLs. The other big thing about this tool is there are no MX record changes required, which is a that's a huge benefit in my opinion if I put my engineer hat back on. We do have an upgraded version of that called Total Protection, which basically has all the bells and whistles, not just detection, gets you full end-to-end protection. More information on that can be found at the URL at the bottom of the screen. We do have some additional resources. So again, we've got the dojos. So today we've got dojos for backup and DR, VMware, Hyper-V, and MSP. We also have dojos coming in the near future for Microsoft 365, Microsoft Azure. It's getting easier to say what we don't have dojos for than what we do. So if you're interested in checking out some additional content, go to altera.com/dojo and simply pick your poison. And then this is the resource link that Paul mentioned. Again, you'll get a copy of the slide deck, so don't feel like you have to quick and jot all these down. But a lot of great resources here for you to check out after the presentation today.
And the second one from the bottom. Sorry, Andy, just one quick one. Go back. The second one from the bottom there talks about the certification exams, and the one at the very bottom talks about the UEFI attacks that it's good to be aware of.
Very good. Yeah, those are good resources. I took a look at the certification one. That's a lot of great information on that particular blog post. So highly recommend you check that out. And then just because Paul is our presenter today, I wanted to plug his ebook that he recently finished for us, his second edition of the Office 365/Microsoft 365 Essential Companion Guide. Great resource here. And disregard the picture. I don't think it's available for download in the download section. Maybe it is. I didn't check that when we logged into the webinar today. But you can certainly grab a copy of that ebook on our website. Great resource if you're managing Microsoft 365 in production today. Now, questions. I think we did a pretty good job of getting to a lot of the questions as we step through. Are there any questions that you see we haven't covered, Paul?
Yeah, there's two questions I want to cover, and one came back here. Somebody else asked the same question. For the essentials, that is listed as just over $500 US. People keep asking whether it's 10 cores, hyper-threaded cores, or 10 logical processors, which would mean 5 cores with hyper-threading. I haven't been able to find an official answer on that. Everybody just talks about 10 cores. Normally, when Microsoft talks about cores, they do not mean hyper-threading. So that would mean 20 cores. If you can find a single CPU, remember it has to be a single physical CPU with 20 cores. Thanks you, Alexander, for the comment about the book. Now, the other one, yes, you will be sent a copy of the slides, Chris. Now, the other question we've had a couple of times, and it's really for you, Andy, is how to obtain the Azure Edition to run on premises on Azure Stack HCI. So in Azure, you just spin it up in there, but how do you get it onto Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've seen a lot of mention that you'll be able to run it on Azure Stack HCI, and I haven't actually seen the downloaded ISO yet for on-prem myself. I've got a couple of feelers out to some of my contacts within Microsoft, and I'll be sure to include that in the follow-up blog post. That way, we all have access to it, because I've been waiting for that myself as well. So
okay,
more to come on that one.
Yes, Henrik, yeah, an Azure Stack HCI cluster has to be able to contact Azure on a regular basis.
Yep, correct. If it does not check in once every 30 days, it will start complaining.
Right. So a couple of other little questions, but we'll answer those in the blog post / video afterwards.
Yep, definitely. Sounds good. We're about 5 minutes over. Hey, Paul, I wanted to say thanks for taking the time and talking to us today. It's been fun doing this with you. I enjoyed it, and looking forward to doing the next one with you.
Yeah, I had fun too.
Yep. And then everybody, we'll let you get back to your day. Really appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us. And we hope to see you again for a future webinar on, a to be determined topic sometime in the future. Appreciate it, everyone. Have a good day.